Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to move our discussion from the micro level to the macro level. That is, we're going to be talking about society as an aggregate whole unit. We've already begun to understand the notion that we both create and are created by society. Well, now we're going to think about what is it that society is. What is it that allows society to stick together as a cohesive group? What makes society stable? And how are people beginning to think about these things? So there's two questions we're going to be dealing with in this lecture today. How can we begin to think about how a society hangs together? What makes it stable? And this question will become critical as we try to get at the basic theories of society. The second question is what historical changes were major social theorists that we're going to be dealing with the rest of the semester, such as Durkheim and Marx, were responding to. What historical changes were these major social theorists responding to? So we're going to be going off in that direction now. For now, I want you to think about a couple of different questions regarding social theory. I want you to begin to try and apply these kind of abstract ideas that we're going to be talking about to what you see and how you think and how you ask questions as you go through the course of your daily life. Social theories are basic models of society. Social theories are based on and ask these kinds of questions. What is the basis of society? How do we act together in a stable way? Another good way of thinking about it is what is the glue that holds society together? As we think about these various theories and these various perspectives, I like that term glue. What is the glue that holds society together that we can think about and ask on a continuing basis? The other thing that you need to think about in terms of theories is the idea of what a model is. A model is a mental image that scientists have of the structure of society. It influences the kind of questions we ask about the world, what we see, how we explain things, and importantly, and this is the critical one, these various models influence what we see as solutions to major social problems. I want to present to you two different models that we'll be talking about in the rest of the semester. The conflict and the order model, which is something you probably have seen in your textbook already, and we really haven't talked about it yet. But this is where I'm going to be going. This is the direction of these next couple of lectures. But I like to bring up this idea of models because there's always two ways of seeing the same problems, two sides of the coin, two views that are going to give you a different picture of what's going on. And importantly, when you think about all the problems in society that exist and the ways in which we can find solutions, these have really strong implications in the models and the question that you ask. That is, whether you take a conflict or an order perspective in explaining and understanding the social world impacts the kind of solutions you will look at to figure out how to actually do something about it. Okay, there are two, I could at this point just jump right into the theories of Emil Durkheim and Karl Marx, who are the two main theorists that we're going to be dealing with. However, before I do that, I want to really get you into the mindset of how to think theoretically and how to think as social scientists do using these models. And how to ask questions about the world as a whole and the nature of social stability. So I want to do this two ways. The first way, I just want you to think for a second of a situation that you've been in lately or in the last year or so, where there's a large collection of people and where there are rules that govern that particular group that maybe aren't the same rules that govern society as a whole, and how is it that social group doesn't break out into complete chaos? A lot of people like to think of a concert. For example, whether it be back in the old days, the Grateful Dead, when they were around, I think of a big Grateful Dead concert, and given the activities that were going on in that situation, what prevented complete chaos from breaking out, even though we all know they were probably breaking a few of the rules and laws that are existent in society. Same thing with any other kind of a concert. Or if you go to Burning Man, which is a festival in northern Nevada, or spring break at the beach somewhere, or any kind of a social situation, large groups of people don't necessarily know each other, coming together what is it that maintains order in that setting? What prevents it from breaking out into complete social chaos? If you want, you can pause the tape, just jot down a few notes on what you think, and by the time we come to the end of the next couple of lectures, go back to this and see how you rethink an answer to that question. That's one way I get you to think about the meaning of social theories. The second way is by going historically. What I like to do is spend some time talking about the social world that a lot of these dead white guys, who are the guys we always read about, whether we're taking political science or anthropology or psychology, who are always seem to be writing around the turn of the century, the late 1800s, early 1900s, that are the key thinkers in the social sciences and that provide most of the major sociological theories. We always read them, abstract their ideas from the social context in which they live, and memorize them and go on. I don't want you to do that. I want you to get into the heads of these folks and just think why they're asking the questions about the nature of the social world that they are, and how is it they've come up with the answers and the solutions that they have. So this lecture, I'm going to take you back in time through the transformation from a feudalistic to an industrial society and get a sense of the kind of social changes that were occurring that can explain the way these guys thought. And on the slide, I will simply say that there were dramatic global social changes that were occurring from the 1600s to the 1900s in the Western world that changed dramatically the way humans related to each other. The very nature of social relationships were undergoing dramatic transformation. I talk about the Western world mostly because that's what spurred a lot of these thinkers, not that there weren't other perspectives and ways, but that's what we rely on a lot in Western social science. But these thinkers these changes spurred people to think about what maintains social stability, and it caused them to ask a bunch of questions about how to make society work better. Okay, talking about the transformation from a feudalistic to an industrial society. Back in feudalism, ye olden days, my apologies to the historians out there, but feudalism from the 500 AD or whatever to 1800s was after the fall of the Roman Empire. Society was based on tradition. Not many people were reflexive on the nature of social organization because you just basically did what you did. Religion and tradition dictated the form of a good society. So no one had any cause to ask questions or to think about, in any long-term way, the nature of social organization. Think for a moment about what's going on. Put your head back in the Middle Ages. And I have a slide here that I want you to look at, and just sort of put yourself back in the old days of the manor, the castle, where people lived in small villages surrounding the manor. And we're going to talk about the natures of social organization at that time. During feudalism, there was a very fragmented local basis of social organization. You didn't move much in society. There were very hierarchical social relations. Where you were in this hierarchy, whether you were a king or a noble or a vassal or a peasant, had very strong implications for where you lived and how you survived. There was reciprocity. That is, while there was strong differences in nascent social class at that level between kings and the peasants, there was social relationships were based on reciprocity. The lord took care of the peasants and protected them and provided them with military protection if they needed it, and the peasants provided food and other goods to the nobility. So there was reciprocity at some level. Social stability was based on custom, tradition, and religion. You always knew where you were. Everybody did what you did because that's what you were supposed to do. Religion was extremely strong at that time. The Catholic Church basically dictated right and wrong. Also, morality and authority were external to the individual. I mean, this was a really profound idea, that there wasn't any self-regulation mechanisms within you. You didn't think about, oh, how would I do look to everyone? You did what you did because your father told you to, or because the Lord told you to, or God told you to, whoever. External authority was critical and key. The nature of social relationships was very different. People were also not mobile. This slide sort of illustrates the way in which people related to each other at various ways. People stayed in one place at one time, didn't really move about. The world was the world that you could see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. You didn't know about things that were going on in other places. Relationships were face to face. You knew everybody that mattered to you in your life. You knew, you saw, you came into contact with on a daily basis. Plus, these relationships were holistic. That is, who you were to your father was the same person you were to your neighbor, or the same person you were to the lord of the castle. In other words, like nowadays, to you, I am simply teacher. You don't know me as anything else. When I go home, I will be mother to my daughter. When I go visit my dad, I will be daughter. And of course, he can't get in his head that I could actually possess enough knowledge to be a teacher because I'm simply his daughter. In other words, we have very fragmented relationships with people nowadays. Back then, you had much more holistic relationships. Who you were was one nice, rounded, bounded system and identity, and everybody knew you as that. The status you were was the status you were born into. There's none of this notion of moving up, moving out. If you were the cobbler's son, you were going to be a cobbler, end of story. Nothing else to think about, nothing else to worry about. From beginning around the 1600s, 1500s, society began to change dramatically. And what caused this change was the growth of a trading class. That is, a group of people who went from village to village trading goods in exchange for something that they could take back to and then use to buy what they needed in order to survive. This meant a bunch of different things in terms of social relationships. First of all, these people were mobile. They went from one society essentially at that time to the next. They went from one village to the next and were able to see lots of different places. The world that they knew began to be one that was not bounded by where you grew up. Also, the way in which they related to other people then in these villages changed dramatically. Relationships then were not holistic. This person became simply a trader to them. Oh, here comes the guy selling spices. They don't know anything about his family, anything about his background. All they know and all they really care about and all that really matters is he going to bring the spices that they need and be able to trade it at for a decent value. These group of people's success or failure was based on achievement. How well they negotiated the exchange. Were they able to get rid of their spices in one town in exchange for enough money or barter or whatever in order to get the food that they needed, the clothing that they needed, et cetera, et cetera. Furthermore, their success was based on profit from this exchange. That is, could they get more from this exchange to make it worth their trouble to go trading from one village to the next? So their success or failure was based on profit, not exchange. Gone was this notion of reciprocity for them. If you grew up in a village, the village would take care of you. They grew up in no village. They did not stay in any village. So their success or failure was based on profit and exchange. This was a completely different way of relating to people. I can't tell you how much of a different way of relating to people that this was. And picture for yourself, if you will, like I have on this next slide, these guys coming into town, trading goods at some level, creating a whole new class of people coming into the small town, just dramatically changed the ways in which people related to each other. All of a sudden, then, we have a society that is based on several different things that never were in existence before. We had the notion of land. I mean, eventually this trading class grew bigger and bigger and more pervasive. We began to have the notion of land, that you could draw a boundary around land and own it in some way or another, and I'll tell you how that emerged in just a minute. We had the notion of labor, that is, the traders could actually labor to sell things to other people, and their labor had to be at some level rewarded. We had an idea of capital that we never had before. The world became much more integrated with each other. We saw the growth of national political units. We saw the growth of money. As you traded from one society to the next, barter was one way, but eventually you had to have similar exchange units in order to make it fair. When you traded a certain amount in one society, in one village for one thing, you had to make sure that the second village got the same thing. All these things dramatically changed the way in which people related to each other, and importantly, all that they knew as truth was completely disrupted. We had a bunch of people relating to each other in completely different ways, not beholden to the rules of the village, but beholden to a completely different set of rules. There was one phenomenon that occurred that can help make sense of all this, and that was called the enclosure movement. In the 1300s, peasants living in a manor, living on the estate, used the common lands in order to get what they needed in order to survive. That is, the common lands, everybody could raise sheep to get the wool that they could spin to make clothing. Everybody could grow the food that they needed. There was no notion of ownership of all this stuff. By the 1400s, as there began to be exploration of other worlds, wool became valued as a commodity on the world market. So the people who had the most resources, that is the lords and increasingly the kings and queens, realized, hey, you know what? We can gather up a whole bunch of wool, send it out on our ships, trade it off, and make a bunch of money, or the equivalent thereof. So by the 1500s, the monarchy began to fence off the common lands in order to raise sheep. That is, they displaced a lot of peasants from their ability to basically survive and fenced off these lands and grew sheep. One of the queens, Queen Elizabeth, I believe, at the time, did a tour of the countryside in England and began to note that where did all these paupers come from? Paupers everywhere. Well, what we were seeing were all these peasants being displaced from their ability to basically survive and then left with nothing, no way to survive. Eventually these folks moved into the cities and began to take jobs in the growing factories. This created a huge transformation in the way people related to each other. These are completely different ways of relating to each other, lots of social unrest. During this time, we began to see revolutions where people were going, the monarchy, they think they are talking to God, but really they're just telling us what to do, and they're imposing arbitrary rules and throwing us in jail. I mean, also think of the notion of usury was illegal for a long period of time. Usury is nothing but making a profit off of loaning people money. Nowadays, that's second nature to us. Back then, that was considered immoral, unthinkable. And all these laws try to prevent that from happening. When you increasingly have a class of people that is beginning to profit based on things at usury, they don't want these laws in place, so they get mad and start revolutions, essentially, put it real simplistically. But so there began to be a lot of social unrest. Religion was breaking down as an explainer of society. People began to say, what is the nature of the social world that we're existing? What maintains stability? They're looking around saying things are, what happened to the good old days? Everybody's got these new social values now. What's going on? This is the era in which they began to ask these kinds of questions. What maintains social stability? What is it that's causing these revolutions to occur? French Revolution, English Revolution, etc. were happening. And how can we make society better? And actually, a lot of the writings of Emile Durkheim and Karl Marx and others, as well as some you'll read about in political science classes, were asking questions about how can we make society better? What is the nature of government, they would often ask, but they would also ask what is the nature of the social world and how can we make it better? Next time we're going to be talking about specifically some of the questions that these people are asking and specifically turn to the theories of Emile Durkheim and Karl Marx and begin to get into where they're coming from.
If you are interested in any other UNLV distance education course, please call us at 702-895-0334.